He's trespassing. Arrest him now. I don't care if he claims to own this ranch." The HOA Karen shrieked at the cops she'd called on me, standing on my own property. I'd just driven 12 hours to visit my family ranch, only to be greeted by police lights and this blonde woman demanding my arrest. She stood there smirking, confident she'd won. What this small-town HOA president didn't know, back in Washington, my office wall displays photos of 300 HOA presidents I've personally sent to federal prison. My actual job? I run the department that can shut down any HOA in America with one phone call. If you're watching from your own HOA nightmare, comment your location, because this woman just made the biggest mistake of her life. My name is Nathan Hayes, and after 15 years of fighting homeowner association tyranny from behind a desk in Washington, I'd finally decided to take a break. My grandfather's ranch in Texas had been calling to me, promising peace, quiet, and maybe some decent fishing. What I got instead was a masterclass in small-town corruption that would make a mob boss blush. The woman currently directing officers to arrest me for criminal trespassing had apparently been waiting 20 years for this moment, and over the next 72 hours, she would discover exactly why messing with the head of national HOA oversight was the biggest mistake of her life. Hour one of what I now call the Willowbrook War began with me pulling into the ranch's gravel driveway at 9 p.m., exhausted from a 12-hour drive. The moment my truck's headlights swept across the wooden fence my grandfather had built with his own hands, I felt the tension drain from my shoulders. 3 months of dealing with a particularly nasty HOA scandal in Portland had left me running on fumes. All I wanted was to collapse in the old farmhouse, maybe grab a beer from the fridge if the power was still on, and sleep for about 16 hours straight. The universe apparently had other plans. The patrol car's siren shattered the evening quiet before I could even grab my duffel bag. 2 officers approached with the kind of cautious intensity usually reserved for armed suspects, not tired government employees returning to their childhood homes. "Sir, we received a report of suspicious activity and potential breaking and entering," the younger officer said, his flashlight doing another sweep across my face. I kept my hands visible, having dealt with enough law enforcement over the years to know that cooperation went a long way. "Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is my family's property. I'm Nathan Hayes, and I can show you the deed if you'll let me reach for my phone." That's when Margaret Williams made her grand entrance, power walking across the lawn in what had to be her official HOA business pantsuit. Even in the dark, I could see the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly. As I mentioned on the phone, this man is trespassing on HOA-controlled property. We have strict regulations about access after dark, and I've never seen him before in my 15 years as president." She turned to me with the kind of smile a snake might give a mouse. "I'm sure you understand that we have to protect our community from strangers." The older officer, whose nameplate read Rodriguez, shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, he says this is his property. Sir, do you have any proof of ownership?" I slowly reached for my phone, pulling up the digital copies of the deed I always kept handy. Professional habit, really. When you spend your career untangling property disputes, you learn to document everything. "Officer Rodriguez, you'll see here that the Hayes family has owned this land since 1947. My grandfather, William Hayes, purchased it after returning from the war." Rodriguez examined the documents, his expression shifting from suspicious. "This all appears to be in order, Mr. Hayes. I apologize for the confusion." He turned to Margaret, whose smile had frozen into something resembling a wax museum exhibit. "Ma'am, this gentleman has every right to be here. This property isn't part of the HOA jurisdiction." But Margaret wasn't done. She stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume mixed with barely contained rage. "Officer, I think you should know that there have been some questions about the legitimacy of the Hayes property claims. Just last month, we discovered discrepancies in the boundary surveys. Perhaps Mr. Hayes here doesn't realize he's actually on HOA common area." Rodriguez looked between us, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. "Ma'am, that's a civil matter. Without a court order or clear evidence of criminal trespass, we can't take any action." He tipped his hat to me. "Welcome home, Mr. Hayes. Have a good evening." As the patrol cars pulled away, leaving Margaret and me in the sudden darkness, she moved closer. The friendly HOA president mask had slipped completely, revealing something far uglier underneath. 20 years ago, your father destroyed my life," she hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "My family was going to build a resort here, turn this worthless dirt into something special, but William Hayes had to play hero, had to rally the county commissioners against us. My father lost everything, his business, his reputation, his will to live. She stepped back, the fake smile returning. Now it's your turn, Mr. Hayes. You have 72 hours to reconsider your presence here. After that, well, HOA regulations can be quite comprehensive. As she walked away, her heels clicking against the gravel like a countdown timer, I finally understood why my grandfather had warned me about the new people in his last letter. This wasn't just about property lines or HOA overreach. This was personal, generational, and about to get very, very messy. I pulled out my phone and made a quick note. Day 1, Margaret Williams just declared war. She has no idea what she started, because if there's one thing I've learned in my career, it's that HOA presidents drunk on power always make the same mistake. They assume their target is just another helpless homeowner. They never expect someone who knows their playbook better than they do. Day 2 began with what I can only describe as a violation avalanche. At exactly 7 a.m., I stumbled to the front door in my grandfather's old robe, coffee mug in hand, to find my entire porch covered in orange notices. 47 violations, to be exact. I counted them twice, partly out of disbelief and partly because my brain couldn't quite process the absurdity without caffeine. Grass height exceeds HOA maximum by 0.5 inches. Mailbox color does not match approved pallet. Unauthorized vehicle parked in driveway between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Fence posts are 1.2 inches above regulation height. The most ridiculous one made me actually laugh out loud. Visible coffee mug on porch violates outdoor beverage container guidelines. Fine, $300. I gathered up the papers, noticing each was signed with Margaret's unnecessarily elaborate signature and time-stamped at various points throughout the night. The woman had apparently spent hours creeping around my property with a measuring tape and a grudge. But the last envelope was different. Handwritten on personal stationery, it simply read, Nathan. Inside, Margaret's cursive was as sharp as her personality. Mr. Hayes, I trust you've received our welcome package. You'll find that the Willowbrook Ranch HOA takes property standards very seriously. Your grandfather may have been exempt from our oversight due to certain legal technicalities, but those protections died with him. You have 70 hours remaining to consider selling. I have buyers ready to pay above market value. Don't make this harder than necessary. M. Weber. Under her initials, she'd added a postscript that made my blood run cold. P.S. Judge Harrison sends his regards. Judge Harrison. I knew that name from my files back in Washington. He'd been flagged in 3 separate HOA corruption cases, but always managed to stay just clean enough to avoid investigation. If Margaret had him in her pocket, this was bigger than a personal vendetta. I was still processing this when Linda Thompson appeared at my fence line, looking around nervously before waving me over. Mr. Hayes? I'm Linda from next door. I'm sorry to bother you, but I saw the violation notices and I had to warn you. She handed me a thick folder with shaking hands. I've been documenting everything for 2 years. Margaret's not just vindictive, she's systematic. Look at this. Inside were copies of hundreds of violations issued to various neighbors, photos of damaged property, and a spreadsheet showing a clear pattern. She targets anyone who opposes her, drives them out with fines and legal fees. Tom Bradley lost his house last year over a bird feeder. A bird feeder. He'd lived here for 30 years. Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. And it's not just the fines. Things happen. Pets go missing. Gardens die overnight. Cars get vandalized, but somehow there's never any proof. I thanked Linda and spent the next 3 hours reviewing her documentation while fielding angry texts from my boss in Washington. Apparently, Margaret had already filed a formal complaint with my department claiming I was using my position to intimidate a local HOA. The irony was almost beautiful. Here I was, trying to take a vacation, and she'd essentially forced me to investigate her. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from an unknown number. Saw you talking to the Thompson woman. Nosy neighbors tend to have accidents. 46 hours left. That afternoon, I decided to test Margaret's boundaries. I grabbed a tape measure and headed to my supposedly illegal mailbox, making sure to be as visible as possible. Sure enough, within minutes, a golf cart came zipping down the road. Margaret emerged wearing what I can only describe as her battle outfit. Pressed khakis, HOA logo polo, and a visor that probably cost more than most people's car payments. Mr. Hayes, I see you're addressing the violations. How wonderful. Though I should mention that any modifications require approval from the Architectural Committee. The next meeting is in 6 weeks. I straightened up, channeling 15 years of dealing with petty tyrants. Actually, Margaret, I was just confirming that my mailbox is exactly regulation height. Funny thing about measuring tapes, they tend to give different readings depending on who's holding them. Her smile tightened. Are you implying I falsified violations? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating that your measurements are incorrect. I'm also wondering how you managed to measure my grass at 2 a.m., according to this timestamp. Must have been tough to see in the dark. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You think you're clever, don't you? Just like your father. He thought he was clever too, right until the end. Something in her tone made me pause. What exactly are you saying about my father? Her laugh was sharp and bitter. Oh, you don't know? Your precious daddy died of a heart attack right after our last big confrontation. The stress of fighting the inevitable, I suppose. Weak hearts run in your family, Nathan. You should be careful. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. My father had died suddenly 5 years ago, and we'd all assumed it was natural causes. But the timing. I forced myself to remain calm, even as rage built in my chest. Margaret, I'm going to give you one chance to back off. Stop the harassment, cancel these bogus violations, and we can coexist peacefully. Otherwise, I'll be forced to do what I do best. She laughed again, heading back to her golf cart. And what's that? Run crying to your government friends? Judge Harrison is looking forward to your lawsuit. He does so enjoy teaching outsiders about Texas justice. As she drove away, I realized 2 things. First, this went deeper than I'd thought, and second, Margaret Williams had just made a fatal error. She'd threatened my family, revealed her judicial connection, and confirmed she was dirty. In HOA warfare, that's called showing your hand too early. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. If she wanted to play by HOA rules, I'd show her exactly why they called me the closer back in Washington. The 44 hours remaining on her ultimatum would be the longest of her life. Hour 48 arrived with the kind of morning that makes you understand why people write poems about Texas sunrises. I should have been enjoying it from my porch with coffee and peace. Instead, I was staring at the destroyed remains of my grandmother's rose garden while a sheriff's deputy took photos. The bushes hadn't just died, they'd been chemically murdered, the soil around them black and reeking of industrial herbicide. But it was the precision of the destruction that told me everything. Only the heritage roses were dead. The newer plants I'd added last summer remained untouched. Mr. Hayes, I understand you're upset, but without evidence linking this to a specific person, it's vandalism by person unknown, Deputy Chin explained, clearly uncomfortable. I can file a report for your insurance. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. The roses had been my grandmother's pride, cultivated from cuttings her mother brought from Ireland. Margaret had done her homework, known exactly where to strike for maximum emotional damage. What she didn't know was that I'd installed security cameras 3 hours after her threat, high definition, night vision enabled, and uploading directly to a cloud server. Back inside, I pulled up the footage on my laptop, my hand shaking slightly with suppressed rage. There it was, clear as day at 3:17 a.m. Robert Williams, Margaret's husband, skulking across my property with a spray tank. But the audio was what sealed it. Margaret's voice, tinny through his phone speaker. Remember, just the old roses. And Robert, make sure you're wearing the shoes I left out. They're 2 sizes bigger than yours. The calculation of it, the premeditation, made my stomach turn. This wasn't just HOA harassment anymore. This was targeted psychological warfare. I made copies of everything, then sat in my grandfather's old leather chair to think. The familiar smell of pipe tobacco and wood polish helped center me as I considered my options. I could take this to the police, but Deputy Chen had already shown me how that would go. Local law enforcement clearly didn't want to cross Margaret or Judge Harrison. I could file a civil suit, but that would take months and play right into their hands. Or I could do what I did best, use their own rules against them. My phone rang, interrupting my planning. It was Elena Martinez, a lawyer I'd worked with on several cases. Nathan, I got your message. Please tell me you're not taking on a local HOA during your vacation. Her voice carried the fond exasperation of someone who'd seen me tilt at windmills before. Elena, they poisoned my grandmother's roses. This just became personal. I could hear her sigh through the phone. All right, send me everything. But Nathan, be careful. Small-town politics can be nastier than anything we deal with at the federal level. These people protect their own. I spent the next hour uploading documents to Elena while trying to ignore the gaping hole in the garden visible from the window. That's when Dorothy Kim appeared at my back door, carrying a covered casserole dish and wearing an expression of determined sympathy. "Mr. Hayes, I brought you some lunch. Figured you might not feel like cooking after, well," she gestured toward the murdered roses. "Margaret's getting bolder. Usually she waits at least a week before the major attack." I invited her in, grateful for both the food and the company. Dorothy had lived in Willowbrook Ranch for 30 years, predating Margaret's regime by a decade. "Your grandmother and I used to trade rose cuttings," she said, settling into the kitchen chair like she belonged there. "She gave me starts from those Irish beauties. They're thriving in my greenhouse if you'd like some back." The kindness of it nearly broke me. "Thank you, Dorothy. That means more than you know." She patted my hand with her weathered one. "That's what neighbors do, dear. The real ones anyway, not like that Williams woman and her collection of flying monkeys." "Tell me about Judge Harrison," I said, pouring her tea from the pot I'd just made. Dorothy's face darkened. "Randall Harrison owns half the commercial real estate in the county. He and Margaret have a cozy arrangement. She drives down property values with her harassment. His shell companies buy them up cheap, then they flip them for resort development. Your family's ranch is the crown jewel they've been after. 60 acres of prime land with highway access and those natural springs, worth millions to the right developer." The picture was becoming clearer. This wasn't just about revenge for Margaret's failed resort 20 years ago. This was an ongoing criminal enterprise disguised as HOA enforcement. "Dorothy, would you be willing to go on record with this information?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "At my age, what can they do to me that time won't do worse? Yes, I'll testify, but you'll need more than one old woman's word against Judge Harrison." After Dorothy left, I returned to my security footage, this time going back further. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past week, there had been multiple instances of trespassing. Robert Williams measuring my fence posts at midnight, Margaret herself taking photos of my property from various angles, and on 3 separate occasions, an unfamiliar man in a suit examining my boundary markers and taking notes. But it was the conversation captured 2 nights ago that changed everything. Margaret's voice carried on the wind to my sensitive microphones. "Yes, Judge Harrison, the psychological pressure is working. He'll crack, just like his father did. Weak hearts run in that family." Judge Harrison's reply was muffled but clear enough. "Good. The buyers are getting impatient. If he doesn't sell voluntarily within your timeline, we'll proceed with the judicial options. I've already prepared the emergency injunction paperwork. Some creative interpretation of the county codes should do the trick." Margaret laughed. "Grandfather clauses mean nothing if we can prove health and safety violations. That old septic system alone could justify condemning the property. Just make sure your husband doesn't leave any evidence. We can't afford another Tom Bradley situation where questions get asked." I saved the audio file in multiple locations, my mind racing. They'd just confessed to conspiracy, judicial corruption, and possibly murder if their comments about my father were what I suspected. But I needed more. I needed them to incriminate themselves beyond any reasonable doubt. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. 24 hours left, Nathan. I hope you've been thinking about our offer. Your family cemetery plot looks so peaceful. Your father certainly thought so." The cruel implication made my decision for me. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my boss in Washington. "Davidson, I need you to quietly pull everything we have on Judge Randall Harrison and the Willowbrook Ranch HOA. Also, send me the contact information for our friends at the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. It seems my vacation just turned into an off-the-books investigation, because if Margaret Williams wanted to play hardball, she was about to learn why I'd earned the nickname the HOA Executioner in Washington circles. The remaining 24 hours of her ultimatum would determine who ended up in that cemetery plot she'd so thoughtfully mentioned. Hour 60 arrived with all the fanfare of a public execution, which, in a way, it was. Margaret had called an emergency HOA meeting, scheduling it for exactly 72 hours after her initial threat. The community center was packed, standing room only, with the kind of nervous energy that comes before a thunderstorm. I entered through the back door, having learned long ago that dramatic entrances work better when you can observe the room first. Margaret stood at the podium like a general preparing for victory, flanked by her board members and, notably, Judge Harrison himself in the front row. The man's presence sent a clear message. This was not just an HOA meeting, but a coordinated attack backed by judicial power. "Thank you all for attending this emergency session," Margaret began, her voice carrying the false concern of a practiced manipulator. As you know, we have had some serious concerns about the old Hayes property. Safety violations, code infractions, and now environmental hazards that could affect our entire community. She clicked a remote, and badly photoshopped images of my property appeared on the screen behind her. The modifications were so obvious that several people in the audience exchanged skeptical glances. Our architectural committee has documented over 200 violations in just 3 days. More concerning, we have discovered that the property's aging septic system may be contaminating our groundwater. This is not just about property values anymore, this is about the health and safety of our children. I watched from the back as several residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Linda Thompson caught my eye and shook her head slightly, warning me to wait for the right moment. Dorothy Kim sat rigid in her chair, hands clenched in her lap, fury barely contained. The room was clearly split between Margaret's loyalists, who nodded along with every word, and the others, who looked like hostages at their own meeting. The tension was so thick you could practically see it shimmering in the air between the two groups. I noticed several people recording with their phones, despite the no recording signs Margaret had hastily posted. Furthermore, Margaret continued, building to her crescendo, Mr. Nathan Hayes has refused to cooperate with our reasonable requests for remediation. He has threatened board members, intimidated neighbors, and used his government position to harass our peaceful community. We cannot allow one individual to destroy what we have all worked so hard to build. That was my cue. I stepped forward, letting my footsteps echo in the sudden silence. Every head in the room turned to watch me walk down the center aisle. Interesting presentation, Margaret, though I notice you forgot to mention the part where you poisoned my grandmother's rose garden. Or would you prefer we discuss the 3 a.m. trespassing your husband committed? The room erupted in whispers and shocked exclamations. Margaret's smile never wavered, but I saw her hand tighten on the podium until her knuckles went white. Mr. Hayes, you are out of order. This is a closed session, for HOA members only. I must ask you to leave immediately, or I will have security escort you out. I smiled, producing a folder from my jacket with theatrical slowness. Actually, according to your own bylaws, any property owner may attend and speak at emergency sessions. Section 12, paragraph 4. You should know this, Margaret, having written them yourself. Unless you would like to admit to violating your own governing documents. Judge Harrison stood up, his presence immediately commanding attention. The man radiated authority and barely contained anger. Young man, I suggest you sit down before you make this worse for yourself. The HOA has legitimate concerns about your property, and your aggressive behavior only proves their point. I have reviewed the violations personally, and I can assure everyone here that they are both valid and concerning. I turned to face him, keeping my expression neutral despite the rage boiling in my chest. This was the man who had possibly helped murder my father. Judge Harrison, how interesting that you are here. Tell me, do you attend all HOA meetings, or just the ones where you have a financial interest in the outcome? The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Harrison's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Margaret intervened. Enough of this disruption. I motion to vote on emergency action against the Hayes property, including immediate liens for all outstanding violations and a recommendation for county condemnation proceedings. Several board members seconded the motion with suspicious speed, clearly rehearsed. But I was not done, not even close. Before you vote, there is something everyone should see. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the room's audio system, a feature I had tested earlier while the room was empty. The recording played crystal clear, Margaret and Harrison discussing their plans, admitting to the conspiracy, joking about my father's death. The room exploded into chaos. People jumped to their feet, shouting questions and accusations. Margaret's face had gone from confident to ash white in seconds. That is fabricated. He is using his government resources to create fake evidence. This is exactly the kind of harassment I warned you about, but the damage was done. Even her supporters looked uncertain now, whispering among themselves and glancing nervously at Judge Harrison. Dorothy Kim stood up, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. I have lived here for 30 years, and I have watched you destroy this community one family at a time. The Bradleys, the Johnsons, the Parks, all forced out so your judge friend could buy their land cheap? We all knew something was wrong, but we were too scared to speak up. Well, I am not scared anymore. More voices joined in, a chorus of long-suppressed grievances, but Margaret had one more card to play. She slammed the gavel repeatedly until the room quieted. Mr. Hayes, you have made serious accusations without proof. However, I have proof of my own. She produced a manila folder with theatrical flair, her confidence returning. This is a lien document, signed and notarized, showing that William Hayes borrowed $50,000 from the HOA Reserve Fund in 2003. That debt, with interest and penalties, now exceeds $300,000. As you can see, the signature is authenticated, the notary seal is genuine, and the document predates Mr. Hayes' death. According to state law, this debt transfers to his heir. Nathan Hayes owes this HOA $300,000, due immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. This was her masterstroke, her killing blow. She passed copies around the room, and I could see people's expressions changing from sympathy to suspicion. I took one of the copies, examining it carefully while my mind raced. The forgery was excellent, almost perfect. Elena had warned me something like this might happen, but seeing it still felt like a physical blow. Then I spotted it, the tiny detail that would unravel everything. I looked up at Margaret with a smile that made her step back. This is impressive work, Margaret. Really top-notch forgery. There is just one problem. My father was deployed to Afghanistan from January 2003 to March 2004. Kind of hard to sign HOA documents from Kandahar. But here is the real kicker. Elena, would you please come in now? Elena Martinez entered, with 2 FBI agents, and the color drained from Margaret's face completely. The notary whose seal you used, she was not licensed until 2005. The paper you used, it contains whitening agents that were not manufactured until 2007. And Judge Harrison? He is about to have much bigger problems than a failed HOA coup. Gentlemen, I believe you have some arrests to make. As chaos erupted again, Margaret turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. You think you have won? Check your mail tomorrow, Nathan. My resignation letter is not the only thing I filed with the county. Even facing arrest, she was still playing games. But what could she have possibly filed? The question nagged at me as the FBI agents read her rights, and I realized this war was far from over. The 24 hours following Margaret's arrest should have been a victory lap. Instead, they became a masterclass in why you never underestimate a cornered predator with powerful friends. I woke up to find my bank accounts frozen, a cease and desist order nailed to my door, and 3 separate lawsuits filed against me for defamation, harassment, and tortious interference with. Judge Harrison might have avoided immediate arrest, but he had clearly spent the night mobilizing every legal weapon in his arsenal. The man had connections throughout the Texas legal system, and he was using every single one of them to crush me before I could expose the full extent of their corruption. Nathan, this is bad, Elena's voice crackled through my phone as I stood in my kitchen, staring at the legal papers covering my table like a blanket of threats. Harrison has filed an emergency injunction, claiming your property poses an imminent health hazard. He has fast-tracked a hearing for tomorrow morning, and guess which judge is presiding? His golf buddy, Judge Thornton. They are trying to condemn your property before the FBI investigation gains traction. If they can force a sale, the proceeds would go to settling your supposed debt to the HOA. I poured myself coffee with hands that were not quite steady, processing the full scope of their counterattack. This was the nuclear option, the kind of all-out assault that destroyed lives and left families ruined. But Harrison had made a critical error in his rage and desperation. He had assumed I was just another government bureaucrat who would fold under pressure. He did not know about the war chest of favors I had accumulated over 15 years, or the very specific phone call I was about to make. Elena, I need you to file for an emergency change of venue. Federal court, not state. We are invoking diversity jurisdiction and claiming this is part of an ongoing federal investigation. Also, call Davidson. Tell him it is time to activate the nuclear option. While Elena worked her legal magic, I decided to play offense rather than sit back and wait for the next attack. Harrison might have frozen my official accounts, but he had not discovered the emergency fund I kept in cryptocurrency, a paranoid habit from years of dealing with corrupt officials who love to weaponize the banking system. I quickly converted enough to cover immediate expenses and hired Marcus Chen, a forensic accountant I'd worked with on several high-profile cases. Marcus, I need you to tear apart the Willowbrook Ranch HOA's finances. Every transaction, every deposit, every sketchy journal entry for the past 5 years. Start with the periods right before each foreclosure. Marcus was the kind of accountant who treated financial fraud like a personal insult to mathematics itself. Send me the login credentials and give me 6 hours. If there is dirt, I will find it. While Marcus worked his numerical magic, I drove to the county courthouse, not to fight the injunction but to do something far more dangerous: pull public records. Every property transaction, every lien filed, every foreclosure in Willowbrook Ranch for the past decade. The nervous clerk, Timothy, clearly recognized me from whatever gossip was already spreading through the small town. "Sir, I have been instructed that certain records are sealed pending investigation," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. I smiled, channeling years of dealing with obstructive bureaucrats. "Timothy, are you familiar with the Texas Public Information Act? Because unless there is a specific court order sealing these records, you are required to provide them. Would you like me to call the state attorney general's office to clarify?" The records painted a damning picture that made my stomach turn. Over 10 years, 23 properties had been foreclosed on for HOA violations. Every single one had been purchased by companies traceable to Harrison. The pattern was so obvious it was insulting to anyone with basic math skills. But patterns were not proof, and I needed something concrete. That is when Providence intervened, in the form of Robert Williams, sitting in his car in the courthouse parking lot, looking like a man whose world had imploded. I approached carefully, noting his red eyes and shaking hands. This could be a trap, but instinct told me otherwise. "Robert, I am sorry about how this played out. I know you were just following Margaret's orders," I said gently. He laughed bitterly, the sound carrying 20 years of resentment. "Following orders. That is what I have been doing for 20 years. Do you know what it is like, living with someone who sees everyone as either a tool or an obstacle?" The dam broke, and the words poured out in a torrent. I have recordings, years of them. Started doing it to protect myself when she began threatening to destroy me if I ever left. She liked to brag about her schemes when she had been drinking. Harrison, the foreclosures, everything. He pulled out a flash drive, his hand trembling as he handed it to me. "There is something else, about your father. The stress did not kill him, Nathan. Margaret had been poisoning him. Small doses of digitalis in his coffee whenever he visited the community center. She called it her heart attack special, said it was untraceable after the fact." The world tilted on its axis. I gripped the car door to steady myself, rage and grief warring in my chest. My father had been murdered, and his killer had been gloating about it for years. "I will testify," Robert said quietly. "I will give you everything. The recordings, the documents she kept in our safe, all of it." Just then, my phone exploded with texts from Marcus. "Jackpot, call me now." Marcus had found the smoking gun we desperately needed. "Nathan, they have been embezzling for years. Fake vendor payments, ghost contractors, the whole 9 yards. But here's the beautiful part. They got sloppy during COVID. Margaret authorized payments to a cleaning company that did not exist, owned by a corporation registered to Judge Harrison's wife. Over $800,000 in fraudulent payments over 18 months. This is RICO territory. Racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, and with Robert's testimony, possibly murder. That evening my phone rang with a blocked number. I knew who it would be before I answered. "Nathan Hayes," Harrison's voice oozed false confidence. "You are playing a dangerous game. Margaret might have been careless, but I have been doing this for 30 years. You have no idea how deep this goes." I laughed, surprising both of us. "Judge Harrison, you still do not get it. You have been playing small-town tyrant so long you have forgotten how the real world works. By tomorrow morning, the FBI, the IRS, and the Texas Attorney General will all have copies of your financial records. Your house of cards is about to collapse." The silence stretched before he spoke again, the confidence cracking like thin ice. "What do you want?" His voice had lost all its authority, reduced to the whimper of a cornered criminal. "Justice for my father, prison time for everyone involved, and every family you destroyed made whole again. That is non-negotiable." I hung up before he could respond, then immediately called Elena. "We have them." Robert turned state's evidence, and Marcus found financial crimes that make Enron look subtle. "How fast can you get this to the FBI?" As I sat on my porch that night, I felt my father's presence strongly. Tomorrow would bring the final battle, but tonight, for the first time since this started, I knew we would win. The empire they had built on cruelty and corruption was about to come crashing down, and I would be there to watch every brick fall. The federal courthouse in Austin stood like a fortress of justice against the morning sky, its limestone columns glowing in the early sunlight. I adjusted my tie one final time before entering, flanked by Elena and 2 FBI agents who had become my constant shadows. The security checkpoint buzzed with unusual activity. Apparently, our little drama had attracted media attention from across Texas. Small-town HOA corruption exposed made for irresistible headlines, especially when it involved a federal investigation and potential murder charges. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching on monitors in adjacent rooms. I spotted Dorothy Kim in the gallery, wearing her Sunday best and giving me an encouraging nod. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Reeves," the bailiff announced, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Reeves had a reputation for being incorruptible and having zero tolerance for judicial misconduct. Harrison's influence definitely did not extend to her courtroom. As we took our seats, I noticed Margaret being led in through a side door, orange jumpsuit replacing her HOA power suits. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her carefully constructed authority. Her eyes found mine across the room, and for a moment I saw not the tyrant who had terrorized a community, but a bitter woman consumed by generational hatred. The transformation was striking and somehow deeply satisfying. Elena rose to present our case, her voice clear and confident as steel. "Your Honor, what began as a simple property dispute has revealed a complex web of corruption extending through multiple levels of local government. We have evidence of embezzlement, racketeering, judicial corruption, and potentially murder. The defendants used the Willowbrook Ranch HOA as a criminal enterprise to illegally seize property and enrich themselves at the expense of law-abiding citizens." She clicked a remote, and the courtroom screens filled with damning financial records. Over the past decade, the HOA collected over $3 million in fines and fees, of which approximately 40% cannot be accounted for through legitimate expenses. This money was systematically diverted to shell companies owned by Judge Harrison and his associates. The prosecution then played Robert Williams's recordings, his late-night confessions echoing through the silent courtroom. Margaret's voice, slurred with wine and cruelty, described poisoning my father with clinical detachment. The digitalis is perfect because it mimics natural heart failure, a little in his coffee each week, and eventually the heart just gives up. No autopsy, no questions, just another old man with a bad ticker, just like we planned. Several people in the gallery gasped audibly. I forced myself to remain stone-faced, even as my hands clenched into fists under the table. This was the first time I had heard the full recording, and the casual evil of it was staggering. Then came my moment on the stand. The prosecution calls Nathan Hayes. I walked to the witness box with measured steps, raising my right hand for the oath while maintaining eye contact with Margaret. This was it, the moment I had been preparing for since discovering the truth. "Mr. Hayes," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about your professional background and why you are uniquely qualified to assess this situation." This was the reveal I had been saving, the ace up my sleeve that would recontextualize everything. I serve as the executive director of the National HOA Oversight Division, a federal agency created to investigate and prosecute HOA crimes across all 50 states. In my 15-year career, I have successfully prosecuted over 200 cases of HOA corruption. The ripple of shock through Harrison's legal team was deeply satisfying. They had assumed I was some mid-level bureaucrat, not the person who literally wrote the book on HOA corruption. Margaret's face had gone from pale to ghostly white. "In your professional opinion, Mr. Hayes, how does the Willowbrook Ranch situation compare to other cases you have investigated?" the prosecutor continued. I leaned forward slightly, making sure my voice carried to every corner of the room. "This is one of the most egregious cases I have encountered. The systematic nature of the corruption, the involvement of judicial officials, and the use of violence and intimidation tactics put this in the top tier of criminal HOA enterprises. Margaret Williams did not just run a corrupt HOA, she ran a criminal organization." The cross-examination was brutal but predictable. Harrison's lead attorney, a shark named Pemberton, tried every trick in the book. "Mr. Hayes, is it not true that you used your government position to target my clients out of personal vendetta?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "No, sir. I was on vacation when your clients targeted me. I did not use any government resources until after they committed multiple crimes, including destruction of property and attempted fraud. Every action I took was in response to their criminal behavior, not the other way around." Pemberton tried several more angles, but each one fell flat against the mountain of evidence. The real victory came when Judge Harrison himself was brought in, having been arrested that morning on federal corruption charges. Seeing him in handcuffs, stripped of his judicial robes and authority, was more satisfying than I had imagined. The man who had terrorized an entire community with his corrupt influence was finally facing justice. But it was Margaret's final statement that provided the most dramatic moment. Given a chance to speak before sentencing, she stood and faced me directly. "You destroyed everything," she hissed, her composure finally cracking completely. "Just like your father destroyed my family's dreams. But at least I got to watch him die slowly, knowing I was the one who did it." The confession, made in open court, sealed her fate completely. Judge Reeves' voice was grave as she delivered her ruling. "I have presided over many cases in my career, but rarely have I seen such calculated cruelty. The evidence shows a conspiracy that perverted the justice system itself. While the jury will determine guilt on the criminal charges, I am issuing immediate rulings on the civil matters. All HOA liens and violations issued during Margaret Williams' tenure are hereby vacated. All properties seized through HOA foreclosure proceedings must be returned to their original owners or their heirs with compensation for lost equity. This court will not allow the fruits of such corruption to stand." The courtroom erupted in cheers and sobs of relief. Families who had lost everything were getting their homes back. But I kept my eyes on Margaret as the weight of her defeat finally hit her. The empire she had built on cruelty and corruption had collapsed in a single morning. As court officers prepared to lead her away, she turned to me one last time. "This is not over," she whispered, but the threat felt empty now. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Patricia Williams, HOA president from Colorado. We have a situation. Margaret Chen was my mentor. The war for Willowbrook Ranch might be over, but apparently the corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Should I help, or was this another trap? One thing was certain. My fight against HOA corruption was far from finished." 6 weeks later, I stood in the driveway of 1423 Willowbrook Court, holding a set of keys that felt heavier than their weight suggested. The moving truck behind me contained the entire lives of Margaret and Robert Williams, packed up and ready for their journey to a small apartment in Houston, the only place Margaret could afford, with her assets frozen and her legal bills mounting. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The HOA president who'd driven so many from their homes was now being evicted from hers, and the man she'd tried to destroy was her landlord. "I still can't believe you bought it," Dorothy Kim said from beside me, holding a potted rose bush, a cutting from the Irish beauties we'd managed to propagate from her preserved collection. "Seems fitting, though. Your grandmother always said the best revenge was a life well lived." I smiled, watching as Margaret emerged from the house for the final time. Prison had aged her a decade in just 6 weeks. The preliminary hearings had not gone well, and her lawyer had advised preparing for a lengthy sentence. She walked past without acknowledging me, but Robert stopped, looking healthier than I'd seen him since this all began. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me testify, for helping me get immunity. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm trying to make things right." He'd already begun working with the FBI to unravel other HOA corruption schemes, his insider knowledge proving invaluable. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Robert. Use yours well." As their car pulled away, followed by the moving truck, neighbors began emerging from houses like survivors after a storm. The transformation in Willowbrook Ranch over the past 6 weeks had been remarkable. Without Margaret's iron fist, the community had flourished. Garden gnomes appeared in yards, children's chalk art decorated driveways, and Tom Bradley had installed not 1, but 3 bird feeders in defiant celebration. "So what are you going to do with the house?" Linda Thompson asked, joining our growing gathering. I looked at the perfectly manicured structure that had been Margaret's fortress of control. "I'm thinking of turning it into a community center, a place for legal clinics, HOA education workshops, maybe a library of resources for homeowners dealing with board abuse. What do you all think?" The enthusiastic response answered my question. Within minutes, people were volunteering to help with renovations, suggesting programs, and sharing ideas for making it a true community resource. That evening, I hosted a barbecue in my grandmother's restored garden. The new rose bushes were small but healthy, planted in soil that had been professionally remediated and blessed by Dorothy in what she called an exorcism of negativity. The entire neighborhood showed up, bringing dishes and stories and laughter that hadn't been heard in Willowbrook Ranch for years. Judge Harrison's corruption trial was set to begin next month, with dozens of additional charges added as the investigation expanded. His network of corrupt judges and developers was unraveling across 3 states, all thanks to evidence uncovered in our little Texas drama. As the sun set and the gathering continued under string lights, Elena pulled me aside. The Attorney General called. They want to expand your department, give you resources to go after these corruption networks nationally. Interested? I looked around at my neighbors, my friends, laughing and sharing food in a community reborn. Can I work remotely? I've got a ranch to run and a community center to establish, she laughed. I think that can be arranged. Besides, something tells me Willowbrook Ranch is going to become a model for HOA reform. Ground zero for the revolution, so to speak. Later that night, I stood alone in what would soon be the Margaret Williams Community Resource Center, holding a photo of my father I'd found while cleaning out the house. He was young, idealistic, standing in front of the very building where he'd fought against corruption decades ago. "We got them, Dad," I whispered to the photo. "We got them all." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, my heart raced with old reflexes, but when I opened it, I had to laugh. It was from Patricia Williams, no relation to Margaret, the HOA president from Colorado who'd reached out weeks ago. "Mr. Hayes, our board voted unanimously to implement your transparency reforms. Also, we're naming our new community garden after your father, though you probably have enough gardens now. Is it true you bought your enemy's house? That's absolutely savage. We stan a petty king." I saved the number, already planning my next visit to Colorado, because Dorothy had been right about the best revenge being a life well lived, but she'd left out the part where that life could also include turning your enemy's stronghold into a beacon of hope for others. As I locked up the house and headed back to the ranch, I could almost hear my grandmother laughing. The boy who'd left to fight HOA corruption in Washington had come home to find it in his own backyard, and in defeating it, he'd found something more valuable than revenge: a community, a purpose, and a future built on justice rather than fear. The war was over, the healing had begun, and somewhere in federal prison, Margaret Williams was learning what it felt like to live under rules she couldn't bend, break, or weaponize. Now that was poetic justice worth savoring.